here. Colorado, went out there with the family. I rented on a ranch house out on home to go, inexpensive, cheap houses to rent, they say. And so we rented this ranch house out in the mountains in the high country. It's a working ranch, 40,000 acre working ranch. And they said when you go up to the main house, you got to make sure to always open and close the gate. There's cattle. And so the first time we pulled up, my vehicle had my sons in it and my wife. And I looked at my son, Matt, and I said, "Get the gate." He's like, "All right." And he jumped out. He crawled over the gate and started running up to the house, just leaving us hanging there. And I'm looking at my son, Mark, and Mark's like, "Your son's an idiot." And I said, "I know." And Mark jumped out, but I could see on his face, he was already giggling. He jumped over the gate, ran up to the house. Bonnie gets out, she jumps over the gate, right? Everybody's having fun at my expense. And then that was the game all week long. My two daughters did it to me. My grandchildren did it to me every day. So at one point, I'm sitting down there all by myself, and I get out of the truck. I go up, I open the gate. I get back, I pull my truck through, park it. I get out, and I'm closing the gate, and my daughter come running back down the hill, jumped in my truck, took off without me. My children are evil geniuses, all right? I love being their dad, and I love being a dad, and you do too. And so on behalf of Lincoln Christian Church, just happy Father's Day. I hope you have a great day today, especially here in church. Also, we're hoping for a good day. I'm going to tap into a very familiar story that you probably know well, the story of David and Goliath. But maybe I can point out some things you were unaware of. We're in this series on the life of David. What does it mean to be a person after God's own heart? That's the phrase that caught my attention. That David was this person after God's own. How do I be a person who chases after the heart of God? Well, there's all these little components in the life of David as you read through his story, and you're like, oh, that's one of the ways, and that's another way, and that's it. And so we've been building on this. Today, I want to just talk about courage and trust. I want to talk about living in the world we're living in where giants are coming at us. And how do you defeat these giants? It takes a great deal of courage, takes a great deal of trust. That's what we're talking about. David was a warrior from birth. In fact, as a shepherd boy, he'd already defeated a lion. He'd already defeated a bear. Now today, he's got to stand against Goliath. On paper, this story doesn't work out, by the way. A boy against a giant, that just doesn't work out. Unless that paper is a page in the Bible. Unless God is a part of the story, then all of a sudden things work out. We're going to be in 1 Samuel 17. If you know the passage well, I'll set it up real quick. The Philistines are great enemies of Israel. The Philistines, they're coming against Israel. They gather on one hill. King Saul and the Israelites, his army, gathers on the other hill. There's this big valley between them. They're yelling and screaming at each other day after day. They're taunting each other. They're making fun of one another. And neither one wants to attack the other, because it would mean going down into the valley and then attacking uphill. And nobody wants to give their enemy the upper hand. So they just stay there. And then there's this moment where they say, hey, let's get this giant to come out. And maybe his name's Goliath. Maybe our champion will fight your champion. We'll see who wins from this. Goliath is 9 feet tall. There's people in this room. You don't believe in Scripture. And already you're tempted to write this story off. 9 foot tall giant? No way. And here's something you need to know. In the Guinness Book of World Records, a record that has never been broken since the book first came out in 1955, is the world's tallest man. His name is Robert Wadlow, and he stood 8 feet 11 inches tall. Goliath was only 1 inch taller. You can go to Wadlow's hometown. There's a statue of him there, a life-size statue, and you can stand beside it and get your picture taken. But all of a sudden the story does become a little believable, doesn't it? Here's how God wanted you to hear the story. 1 Samuel 17, starting in verse 8. Goliath stood and he shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine? Are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man, have him come down to me. If he is able to fight and kill me, well, then we'll all become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, You will become our subjects and you will serve us. In this moment of this intimidation enters our hero, a boy by the name of David. David comes because he's got 3 brothers in armies of King Saul. His dad said, hey, I want you to take a lunch to your brothers. So David is now kind of a DoorDash thing going on. Explain it to your grandpa next to you. And so David's life probably didn't feel any different that day when he got up. David's life probably didn't feel like it was going to be a great day. He's just running an errand based on his dad. Take lunch to my brothers. But when he gets there, he hears this giant. This giant, by the way, has been coming out every morning and every night for 40 straight days. And he's been blaspheming the God of Israel. Now, let me stop here for a moment and let you know that the armies of Israel, Saul's army, every morning and every night would have had a time of prayer and devotion. And that's just when this giant decides to come out and scream all kinds of vile things, mean things, gross things, just blaspheming against God. And Israel has been sitting there listening to it, and they've heard it 81 times and have done nothing. David shows up and hears it just one time, and he says, enough is enough. Somebody has to go down and face this giant. How come somebody hasn't shut this giant up, he's asking. David's brothers come unglued on him. They say, this is what's called friendly fire. When you shoot somebody who's in your own family, who's on your own team. You know, it happens sometimes in the church. We can shoot each other with words sometimes, and you're like, we're supposed to be on the same team together, but we do it. And his brothers attack him. Which, by the way, just real quick, going back to last week, do you remember that God didn't pick any of those boys to be the king? Now you know why. Because their courage just melted away in the presence of this giant. Well, King Saul hears about David challenging, and he says, bring the kid with me. And he's impressed with David. David's bravado is amazing. And David says, hey, fear not, bro, I'll take on the giant, and my own interpretation. And Saul says, all right. Go out. Oh, by the way, in the middle of all this, David gives his credentials to the king. He says, you don't have to worry about this giant. He says, I'm a shepherd boy, and a lion came and attacked the sheep, killed it. He said, a bear came along and attacked the sheep, killed it. He says, this giant will be no different. So Saul says, all right. So David goes out into battle. Verse 40. Then David took his staff in his hand, chose 5 smooth stones from the stream. He put them into a pouch of the shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand, he approached the Philistine. Stop for a minute. 5 smooth stones have caused a lot of debating. I don't know. God doesn't really tell us why 5. There's people who are like, why didn't he just take 1? He only needed 1. Wasn't his faith big enough? That's probably not why. Some have even suggested this crazy theory that when you're swinging your arm with a sling, you need the balance. I doubt that. What I did discover that I do like as a thought is that later on in 2 Samuel, you find out that from the city of Gath, relatives of the giant, probably his brother, that there's 4 other giants. And maybe David was just prepared for this well-known family of giants, that if he kills Goliath, those 4 brothers are going to come down and they're going to try to bring revenge on him. And so maybe David was prepared to knock out each one. I don't know. Maybe. If why there's 5 stones is going to hang you up, then you got other problems with the story, because here's how the rest of it goes. Verse 42. Then Goliath looked at David. He looked him over. He saw that he was a little more than a boy, glowing with health, handsome, and he despised him. He said to David, am I a dog that you come at me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his god, small g. Come here, he said. I'll give your flesh to the birds and to the wild animals. Now there's the threat. Verse 45, David said to the Philistine, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God, capital G, of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands. I'll strike you down. I'll cut off your head. This very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and to the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God, capital G, in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands." Verse 48, as the Philistine moved closer to attack David, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. All my life I thought Goliath attacked David. It wasn't. David attacks Goliath. And there's been a lot of debate, too, as to how close were they in this moment. And people are all over the map as to how close they needed to be. And I've done my own research, and I discovered the answer. I know how close they were. You could say David and Goliath were about a stone's throw apart. Made me laugh when I wrote that. Verse 49, and David reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it, and he struck the Philistine on the forehead. That stone sank deep into his forehead, and he fell face down to the ground. Face down to the ground. All right, just real quick. Is he knocked out? Is he dead? We don't know, but David immediately runs over. He uses Goliath's own sword, and he severs the giant's head. Whew. If you keep reading the story around verses 54 or 57, we learn that for the next 30 days, David carried around the head of Goliath. Every party he was invited to, every celebration, he shows up with the head of Goliath. My Sunday school teacher never told me that part. As a junior higher, I don't know what I would have done with that, but someone between services said, "Wow, God used Goliath to get David ahead." I should never talk to people between services, I guess. Why did you need to know it was face down? Oh, this is important. Normally you would think getting hit by a rock would have driven him backwards, but who's really knocking Goliath down? It's not David who's knocking Goliath down, it's the Lord who's knocking him down. And he goes face first into the ground, and then his head is severed off. And this freaks out the Philistines so much that when they see this moment, they take off running in sheer panic. Now, a little background to the story real quick. Back in the early part of 1 Samuel, guess what? There's a story where the Philistines have taken capture of the Ark of the Covenant. You know, the Indiana Jones Ark of the Covenant, the presence of God Ark of the Covenant. And when they capture the Ark of the Covenant, they take it to their town and they put it into their temple, their false temple, which is to a false god by the name of Dagon. And they walk in the Ark of the Covenant and place it right at the feet of Dagon, this huge statue of him. They go to bed. The next morning, that statue has been knocked over face first, and the head has broken off and rolled aside. And it freaked the Philistines out when they saw that. Because in their mind, they immediately said, the God of Israel is more powerful than our God. And the priest of that time was like, "Oh, no, you are over." And they stood the statue up. They put the head back on. The next night, the exact same thing happened again. And so in every Philistine's mind, when they see their champion once again knocked face down with his head severed off, I wonder if they remembered that moment where they were convinced the God of Israel was more powerful than their false god. Maybe. Why did you and I need to know all of that? It's in God's word. Why do I tell you that story? I trust that that's the right story to tell. I trust that's history. What does this story do for you and I today? We always hear sermons about fighting our own giants. We could do that. You could walk out here today and say, you know what, there's a giant in my life and I need to fight this giant. I need to fight for my marriage, or I'm up against the giant of health, or I'm up against the giant of finances, and I need to stand up and fight this giant in my life. I need to face this head on. Maybe that's a lesson that you're picking up on, maybe. But what's going on in the background of this story is there is a giant who is committing blasphemy against God, and there's just a boy who's willing to stand up and say, enough's enough. And it's in that moment of courage, it's in that moment of trusting God that David makes a name for himself. If there wouldn't have been a Goliath that came at David, I don't know if you and I would be studying him today. How important was it that this intimidator showed up? Huge. And you and I live in a time of great intimidation. The giants are plentiful. They're not 9-foot tall men, but they are huge evil philosophies and huge evil industries and huge evil institutions and huge, and they seem so big and their voice seems so loud, and it feels like you don't stand a chance against them. And maybe on any other paper, this story wouldn't add up for you, but because God's in the fight, this story works out great for us. Because those giants fall. And what it takes is a few people who have the courage and the backbone to stand up and say, enough's enough. Yeah, there's a bully out there who's trying to destroy your religion. There's a giant trying to destroy your faith. There's a giant trying to destroy your scripture, a giant trying to destroy your God, and ultimately the giant who wants to steal your faith. He does it all in blasphemy against God. And God says enough's enough. One other giant in our life is the giant of death. And he stays in our face. He's the bully that chases us down the street. I'll get you. Just a matter of time. I'll get you. And you and I stand in the face of that giant. And we say, you might get us, but you don't win. Because of the resurrection of Jesus Christ, we win. Because of the resurrection of Jesus Christ, we live. And so when the giant of death comes knocking at your door, you're not intimidated. You're not afraid. Because that giant's already been defeated and knocked down. Where is God's people who have backbone? Where is God's people who stiffen their jaw and say, enough's enough? Where is it? Or do we fall to the intimidation of another giant? What does it mean to be a person after God's own heart? It's someone who faces the giants of our time, trusting God. Is that you? Are you the David of our day? Man, we need you right now. Your family needs you right now. Your businesses need you right now. Your marriages need you right now. Your church needs you right now. Someone who will stand against the blasphemies of our time and say enough's enough.